Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniel Hahn. I'm not obviously going to be on this panel, otherwise I would be somewhere slightly more comfortable than kneeling on the floor. I'm just going to briefly introduce this panel. What's going to happen is we have about half an hour for this conversation about getting started in translation, but we've asked our three speakers really just to be here to take your questions. They're going to speak for maybe a couple of minutes to introduce themselves at the very beginning, but there isn't going to be a sort of proper chaired conversation. They're going to be here and they're going to respond to whatever you want to talk about, so do please ask them questions. We have Rosalind Harvey, who is a translator, E.J. Van Lenen and Ellie Steele, who are publishers, who will tell you a bit about themselves. And we have about half an hour, and as I say, think of things to ask them, and they will be led by what you want to talk about. So off you go. Rosalind, do you want to start by introducing yourself? And
I'll start. Is this on? No. Is it? Yes, it's on now. I can hear myself. Hi, my name is Rosalind Harvey, and I translate from Spanish into English. I guess the way that I got started is probably quite a conventional route, or it's becoming more conventional now, in that I studied Spanish at university at UCL, and then worked for a couple of years at a bookshop, figuring out how I could combine my love of language and literature. And then I heard about the master's program up at UEA, the MA in Literary Translation, and I did that, finishing in 2007, I think it was. And I also did the BCLT summer school the previous summer, which, if any of you get a chance to do it, it's the best way to get into literary translation. It's also just one of the most fun weeks you can ever have. It's a week-long series of language-specific workshops, and you work with a group of maybe between 5 and 10 aspiring translators and an author and a more experienced translator, and you work on a short text, maybe an extract from a short story or some poems or a fragment from a novel. And then in the evening there are seminars and talks on translation and publishing, and you all present your texts at the end. It's a really nice way to see how collaborative translation works and to get a sense of the process. And on that workshop I met Anne McLean, who is a great translator from the Spanish, and we ended up collaborating on a few books together, and she kind of gave me a leg up into the whole profession. So that's how I got here.
I'm EJ. I'm the publisher of Frisch & Co. And it's an ebook only publisher of literature and translation, and it's based in Berlin. And what I do is I work with in close partnership with several different publishing companies from around the world to translate kind of exclusively from their lists into English. It's a way sort of for these publishers to reach the English language market without having to sort of take on the publishing activity themselves. And I got started in publishing a number of years ago, and I always wanted to do kind of literature and translation, but I'm not a translator, so I figured this is the way that I could fit into it, is by becoming an editor and eventually a publisher and so on. So I won't take up too much more time since we only have a half an hour, but yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm sorry, it's very loud. I'm Ellie Steele. I'm an editor at Harvel Secker, which is part of Random House in the UK. Harvel Secker is the international imprint of Random House. We do about 50% of our list in translation. My authors include Enrique Villamatas, the last books of Jose Saramago, Gert Mack, and various English language authors as well. I'm also the coordinator of the Harvel Secker Young Translators Prize, which I will talk a little bit more about at the end of this session. I think that's me. So do start asking.
Does anyone have any questions? Hopefully you do, because otherwise this is a really short session.
To English or from English to Spanish?
Myself personally, I do Spanish to English, and it's most common to work into your mother tongue if you're a literary translator.
I see.
I think it's probably more common to do it both ways in commercial translation, although I'm not an expert, but generally with literary translation you work into your mother tongue, because that's the language you're most comfortable in, most fluent in, and it tends to be the culture that you've grown up in, so you're more aware of the cultural background and references. Yes, with the glasses. Do you want to wait for the microphone, please?
Thank you very much. This is nice. Okay, so you graduated in 2007. You guys have done your studies, and you're here 7 years later. What were some of the before you would get a leg up or get those opportunities, how did you start generating those opportunities or get in a position to get a leg up, or certain things like that? So between zero and published is like a huge distance. What were some of the things that you guys did along the way before you got to that position? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, completely. I guess I was very lucky in a lot of respects in that I had an unofficial mentor. So there are official mentorship programs. The main one is run by the BCLT, the British Centre for Literary Translation. If you have a look on their website, there's information about it. And they have, I think it's about 12 mentorships a year from different languages. And you get paired up with a more experienced translator who helps you work through a text, introduces you to publishers and to editors. That kind of thing does happen on a more informal level. So I was mentored by Anne McLean in that we worked on 2 or 3 books together. We co-translated them. So it was a little like an apprenticeship, I guess. And she also would introduce me to people at the book fair and take me to all the people that you need to know. So that is the best way if you can pair up with somebody more experienced and in the business to get into it. But it's not the only way. There are lots of other things you can do. I mean, I would say the main thing is just to be connected. If you want to be a translator, just get involved. And by dint of you being here, you clearly are interested in this. And there are lots of ways of. It can be quite a solitary profession, but there are networks out there. And I actually run a network called the Emerging Literary Translators Network, and it's just an online forum where people can share advice and ask for support. We post jobs. And you just have to demonstrate that you have some kind of interest in getting involved in literary translation. If you're interested in joining, then anyone come and find me afterwards, and I'll give you more information. We just are about to put on one of our first events, which I'll talk more about just at the end of the session. Yes, at the front.
Sorry, is that okay? I just wondered in what order does it come? So, for example, a new book comes out in Spain, and is it that a number of translators would pitch to translate that book, or do people approach you? I would imagine if there's quite a large number of people who do translation. Do you all sort of put yourselves forward and say, pick me, or do people come to you? How does it work in that sense?
I was at an event yesterday and somebody was describing the process as a beauty contest. So there is an element of lots of people putting themselves forward and there being a slight scrum. I guess it's sort of, there are 2 main ways that it happens. Either you come across a book project that you fall in love with, you read a novel you really think should be in English and you feel that you should be the person to bring it into English, and then you approach editors or publishers who you think have the right list that book will fit with. And you harass them for as long as it takes. The other way is that a publisher may well become aware of a book independently. They might be told about it by an editor friend in another country, or it might be getting good reviews in a country where they speak the language, and then they will approach translators that they trust and are aware of and ask them to translate it. They can also request sample translations from several translators and then sort of pick based on that. So it's a mixture of ways.
My question for you, EJ, because I've been following your interviews and your online presence and so on, and you've been fairly stridently opposed to digital rights management in digital publications.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know if you see your business affected by piracy, if it's something that you monitor, if it's something that you think has benefits, something of your evolving perspective, so to speak.
Sure. So I sell my books without DRM, and this is, I guess, sort of an issue. And for those who don't know, it's a kind of way to make sure that only certain people can buy your book and others can't have access to it, I guess. I haven't seen any evidence of piracy from my books personally. I imagine if I was to see some piracy, I might be a little bit kind of excited about it because it would mean that somebody saw some value in trying to share what it was that I was doing. And really my main problem, and the problem I think for most digital publishers, isn't theft, it's more invisibility. And trying to find a way to get people to find your book on Amazon.com or to find your website and to find you. So I think whereas with books, maybe you would be concerned that people kind of walk into bookshops and walk out with them. For me, I have, I guess, really an unending supply of copies of these things. So it's just a different kind of a problem. I guess if you've read anything that I've written about it online, then I wouldn't say what I think about it has evolved too much. I kind of think that DRM is more or less useless and only harmful, and it would be better if we kind of did away with it altogether. But yeah, I still kind of feel that same way, I guess. Yeah.
I had two quick questions. One relates to the mechanism of translation. I personally translate from Urdu to English, and I was wondering if you experience a similar problem, which is translating certain cultural proverbs and different references. And there seems to be two schools of thoughts. One is that you should stick exactly to the text and be very close to the meaning. And the other school seems to be that you have to somehow explain it, otherwise it will not make sense. But the other school says that you may be adding to it if you do this. I'm wondering if you come across this in your translation, what your professional advice is and what you feel is the best way to go about this, how to translate a whole culture, so to speak, whether you should stick close to the text or whether you should explain it so that it makes sense.
I think it would be strange for any literary translator not to come across that problem. I mean, whenever we're translating language, we're also translating culture. The two are inseparable. And yeah, the two schools of thought. I mean, it depends on context. I would say context is all. There may well be a book. A certain proverb is used, and it's just used in order to illustrate how a character feels about a situation. In which case, you wouldn't need to translate it literally. If it was say a Spanish proverb involving a chicken, and we didn't have a similar one in English, but we have one involving a pigeon, you might want to substitute the pigeon. But say that same proverb was used and the chicken was a recurring motif in the book and one of the characters was nicknamed Chicken, you might want to invent a new proverb, for example. So that would be a situation where context is key. And I don't think there's ever a hard and fast rule about these kind of things. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Would you say that it's better to translate the meaning rather than the words?
Well, you always have to translate the words. I mean, a big shift is always going to take place, whatever you do. You can't get away from that fact. And it depends what you mean by meaning, really. You know, meaning is connected to the literal meaning of the words, but meaning can also be connected to sound within, if you're translating poetry, for example. So it's, and maybe it depends what you mean by meaning exactly. And it's just always context specific.
My second question just relates to the process after the translation is completed. Some people would like to send it to somebody to edit it and improve the English, etc. Whereas some people feel it's better that the person who edits it knows the language from which it's being translated to compare it. Whereas some other people feel it's better to have a clean slate and to just let the person improve the English. I was wondering how you go about this and what your advice is on this.
When you say improve the English, what do you mean exactly?
I mean to say, because translation is a very difficult thing, and sometimes the translator is so embroiled in the actual converting the words that you may or may not lose the picture, and it may be useful just for a copy editor or sub-editor to go through and just see if the flow, if it's all flowing completely, and where required, carry out some editing.
Well, editing will always take place, or ideally it will always take place when you're publishing a translation, and it will be edited, copy edited, and proofread. But I think the idea that you need somebody to check that somebody's done a good job is probably not correct, because ideally you trust your translator to make those decisions.
No, as an editor, we certainly do trust our translators on that. I mean, it is great if the editor can read the original language. Sadly, it's most cases not the case.
What I mean to say is, what if the person editing, because he or she doesn't know the language, they may change the meaning. So how do you get it?
Oh, well, editing, it's suggestion rather than sort of imposing an edit on something. So, you don't just edit a book and send it to copy edit. We'd edit it, we discuss our edits with the translators, and translators are always welcome to say no and to fight back and to say, that's taking it too far away from the meaning. I mean, what we're looking for as editors is something to read fluently in English. So if we feel that a proverb is, totally mystifying to an English audience, we talk to the translator about it, and there's always an element of compromise. So yeah, you'd never just have your book edited kind of against your wishes.
And essentially, when it gets to the editing process, whoever is reading it as an English text in its own right. So they're not going to be looking for slip-ups from Urdu or Spanish or German or whatever. Yes, over there in the green.
I'd like to ask if there's a kind of etiquette about approaching publishers with a pitch. For example, I've sent a pitch to a couple of publishers, got a knockback from one, which was fine, didn't hear anything from the other one. Is it cheeky to follow up the one that hasn't replied?
No, I don't think so at all. I'm smiling because I'm sure I've done that myself, and I apologise to anyone here if that's the case. We get a lot of submissions, and there's a lot to read, and we're always trying to keep on top of it. So a nudge, I think if you nudge the next day, then people might think, give me some time. But I never mind people chasing up on things. So I think it's okay to.
Yes. Can I just ask if there's this feeling that you shouldn't approach several at once, or should you wait to hear back from?
No, I think as long as you're clear about what you're doing, it's always good to say I've sent this to a few other editors, because if someone takes a little while to get back to you, then it's taking you longer and longer to send to other people. And no, I think it's fine to approach various publishers. It's always worth checking with whoever the rights director is first, obviously, to make sure the English rights are still free and that they're happy for you to approach. They might already be in conversation with various editors. So that's what an editor wants to know, that the book rights are actually free before they start investigating. So
thanks very much.
Hi. This is a question for A, is it? Your name, A? Yeah.
It's EJ.
EJ. Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
For EJ and Ali, EJ, you said that there is a number of publishers that you tend to work with on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you end up selecting your titles. I understand that probably book prizes, literary awards of various kinds, they are helpful for potential foreign publishers. So they basically look at these competitions or contests. Is there anything else that you use to kind of make the decision to go for either one or another title? Yeah.
That's a difficult process to really describe, I think, because it varies so much from book to book and publisher to publisher. But how it generally works is these are people that I kind of have established relationships with and who I've worked with before and who I've met here and at Frankfurt many times, and they know what I publish and they kind of have a sense of what it is that I'm looking for already, from their list. What would be interesting for EJ and for Frisch & Co. or for Harville Secker, for example. So I think that's the first kind of thing that narrows it down a little bit. And then as far as prizes are concerned, I don't think I pay too much attention to that because those things don't necessarily mean very much to English readers. Almost invariably, they don't mean very much. So you're really looking for something that's exciting to you personally, or you believe fits into your list. And what that is could be, it varies so widely. It's hard to really say exactly what it is. For me, personally, I want something that's very exciting and that seems to be reaching for something really meaningful, something that kind of is aspiring for art, and that can take any number of forms. So it's maybe that's not much of an answer to your question, but it's kind of hard to nail it down exactly. Yeah.
I think how you find out about books, there are various ways. Recommendations from translators. There are literary scouts who recommend things. Talking to other editors at other publishing houses internationally. I think I think you're right. We don't pay that much attention to literary prizes. If something wins a big prize, that's great. Shows that it's a well-respected book in that country. But it might not necessarily mean the same over here. But if a book's sort of got a buzz around it, I guess, if there are lots of good international publishers buying it, then we'll tend to look at it a bit more closely. But
any more questions? Can you turn the microphone on?
Is that better? Yeah. Ellie, could you tell us a bit more about your role, what you do? Is it English text come to you for translation the other direction, or you get foreign texts come in that you get translated? I'd just love to know a bit more about your job.
Well, I'm not a translator myself, so I acquire books for the Harville Secker list. So as we were just talking to other publishers, buying the rights for them to publish in the UK. And then we'll commission translators, and then I'll edit the book with the translator. And that's the traditional side of editing, the actual working on the book. But then there's so much more involved in it now. So you get involved in the marketing, the publicity, briefing the jacket, talking to the sales department about it, talking to the international sales department. So not that much office time is spent editing. Tends to happen at other times of the day, but that's in a nutshell what I do.
Hi, I've been surprised starting out as a translator to sort of understand how many books or how few books publishers give out each year. I think it sort of helps to get a picture of that by publishers, just because then it helps me to understand what we're up against in terms of how many submissions they're getting and how many things they actually can put out. So could you say, both of you, a little bit about how many books you tend to put out, and of those, I know that you're all translations, but of Harville Secker, how many of those are translated?
Yeah. Well, my list is still pretty small. I did 5 books last year, and I'll probably do between 5 and 7 again this year. So it's not a huge number. But in the United States, for example, Chad Post at Open Letter, he keeps track of how many books are published in translation in the United States each year. And last year it was, I think, around 500. So, and the publisher who put out the most did, I think, maybe 30 or 35 last year. So 5 or 7 is actually, in comparison, not a tiny number, but it's just a sign of how small I think the world overall is for this sort of thing, in the United States anyway. I imagine it's something similar here.
Yeah. I think the Harville Secker list, we do about 37 books a year. I sort of do 10, few fewer sometimes. There are 4 editors at Harville. I couldn't tell you how many books Random House publishes overall, but a lot more than that. But yeah, so half our list is in translation at Harville, so just under 20 books a year in translation. But submission-wise, I couldn't even guess how many we get, but it's a lot. I mean, the publishing directors who are here having books pitched to them will probably be talked to about 20 books just this morning. So yeah, it's a lot.
Is it on? Yeah. Hi. This is a question for Ellie. Is it Ellie or Ellie?
Ellie, yeah.
Ellie. Last year I was quite encouraged by the fact that larger publishers like Harville Secker, for example, and Penguin do actually encourage pitches directly from translators, because I do find it rather frustrating when you yourself believe that a book could fit into a list, but you have no way of approaching, for example, yourself. Is Harville Secker open to
we
submissions from?
We're always open to them. It is, it is managing your time, I'm afraid. So you do just have to keep nudging us. But yeah, no, we're always looking for stuff.
So it's just again the question of if it's done or not done, or
yeah,
if it's
no,
too
I
cheeky.
I think it's definitely. I think it would be a sad day when publishers say that people can't suggest stuff to them. I think often the best books don't come to you directly as a submission from an agent. You'll have heard about them through other means. So no, I would approach, definitely.
Okay, excellent. And my second question is about the pitch as such. Would you, in your case, of course, what does an editor like to hear? Is it just something short, say example, the first pitch? Would it be just a general explanation of the book, a general idea or feeling of the book, or do you need a sample translation at this, everything at once, so to speak, so at one bite?
I think everything at once is probably the best approach. Why not? But yeah, as I would say, a synopsis. If you've done a sample, great. It's always nice to have something you can read in English. And well, maybe this will help to give you an idea of what we have to do when we want to buy a book. So we have to, gather enthusiasm in-house as well. So we'll be going to our sales departments and our other editors and marketing and publicity, and people want to know it's an excellent book, and we're lucky at Harville that we get to publish really quality books that we love, but they also want to know who you think the audience is, who you're going to sell it to, and that doesn't have to mean you're going to sell it to 50,000 people, but you have to have an idea of why you're publishing it and who you think wants to read it, and so just giving your ideas on that, saying I think this is, there are easy ways of doing it, like saying this is an author that's like X author, and if you do that, make sure you really believe they are like that person. But yeah, just giving it a bit of context and positioning it a little bit is really helpful.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. That's the last question we have time for. Ellie has an announcement to make, but before she does, I'm just going to mention 2 events briefly. The first one is Translate in the City, which is a literary translation course held this summer at City University. Come and get some flyers from me if you're interested. It's the 23rd to the 27th of June, and it's run by Amanda Hopkinson and Rochefort, and it'll be great. The second one is the first ever Emerging Translators Network event, which is going to be a one-day industry event held at Free Word on Monday the 21st of July. And if you have any questions about it, come and speak to me or my colleague Ruth Martin at the back there, and we'll give you more information. We're going to be flyering people tomorrow with more information about the agenda and the speakers. Over to you, Ellie.
Thank you. Okay, so the Harville Secker Young Translators Prize is in its 5th year, and for 2014 our language is going to be German. So entrants must be aged between 18 and 34. You can be of any nationality, and you can have 1 or no previously published translations. All the information is up at our website, which is youngtranslatorsprize.com, and that links you through to the Vintage website. And you can download the entry form, the rules, and the story to translate, which this year is Der Hausfreund, apologies to my German pronunciation there, by Harville Secker author Julia Frank, whose brilliant book West is coming out later this year. Our judges are Dame Antonia Byatt, Sean Whiteside and Sally Ann Spencer, who I think are both here. And the deadline for entries is going to be the 1st of August. The prize includes £1,000, a mentorship with Sean on the BCLT scheme that Roslyn was mentioning, which is supported by the Goethe Institute, and also a trip to the Crossing Border Festival in the Netherlands. I hope you will enter if German is your language, and good luck.
Thanks, Ellie and EJ. Thanks all for your questions.